Good evening. This is Kathleen Drew, Chair of the Washington Energy Facility Site Evaluation Council, calling this meeting to order. This is the informational public meeting pursuant to Washington Administrative Code 463-66030 regarding the Desert Claim Wind Power Project and their amendment request. We will hear from the certificate holder and FSEC staff about the process, and then we will move to any public comments. Ms. Grantham, will you call the roll?
Certainly. Department of Commerce,
Kate Kelly, President.
Department of Ecology,
Eli Levitt, President.
Department of Fish and Wildlife, Department of Natural Resources,
Lenny Young, present.
Utilities and Transportation Commission,
Stacy Brewster, present.
Assistant Attorney Generals, Jenna Slocum, John Thompson,
John Thompson is present.
Administrative Law Judge, Dan Gerard.
Present.
For Council Staff, Sonia Bumpus, Amy Hofkemeyer,
Present.
Amy Moon,
Amy Moon, present.
Stu Henderson, Joan Owens,
Present.
Dave Walker, Sonia Scavland,
Present.
Lisa Massengale, Sarah Randolph, Sean Green, Lance Caputo, John Barnes,
Present.
Osta Davis,
Present.
Joanne Snarsky, Alex Shiley,
Present.
Ally Smith, and Carl Halapa.
Present.
And do we have anyone for the Council for the Environment present?
Bill Sherman from the Council for the Environment.
Thank you, Bill. Chair, there is a quorum.
And Andrea, this is Dave Walker. I am present. I couldn't get off mute.
Thank you,
Apologies.
Dave. No worries.
Thank you. So with that, we have the agenda in front of us, and we will move on now to the certificate holder presentation. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Kathleen. Good evening, Chair, Council members, FSEC staff, members of the public, other members who just said they were present. Thank you for all taking the time to attend this public meeting for the Desert Claim Wind Project. We greatly appreciate everyone's time on this matter. We would like to briefly describe, for those of you that are not familiar with the project, a little bit about it so that you could become more familiar with it. And we can explain the rationale and basis for our request for an additional extension of time to complete the construction of the proposed project. So let me start by saying first, my name is Rick Miller. I am a senior development director at a company called EDF Renewables. We have been the owner and developer of the Desert Claim Wind Project LLC project for several years, quite a long time actually. It's been our pleasure to work with FSEC staff in the past and the local community in getting the most recent SCA approval completed. With me is my colleague Levi Cox. He is.
And why don't we advance the slide? I think you're going to have to tell him, Rick.
Oh, gotcha. Sorry. Thank you, Karen. Levi Cox, thank you, is a project developer. He's relatively new to the Desert Claim project, like some of the FSEC members, so you're all in the same boat. Levi is an experienced developer And he is well-versed in projects that have complicated permitting approvals and mitigation plans. He's most famously done several very large BLM projects in Southern California and Riverside County that are solar PV, and he has some experience in wind as well. We've been working together for almost 15 years. So I wanted to take this opportunity to introduce Levi Cox to the FSEC members and members of the public, as he will likely become the lead developer for the project moving forward. And then Karen McGaffey from Perkins Coie, who I think some of you know, she's been helping EDF Renewables with this project since its inception, a very long time, helping to keep us on the straight and narrow, and always appreciate her counsel. And so I'm going to run through some of the project, and then Karen can run through some of the SCA amendment requests, and then we can answer any questions you might have. Could you advance to the next slide, please? So this is simply a project location map. The project is in Kittitas County in central Washington. It's shown here on the map. The project has a maximum generating capacity of 100 megawatts. If we could turn to the next slide, please. And I just want to say, if anyone has any questions, I don't mind taking questions as I go. Otherwise, I'm going to just run through the slides, but do not feel shy to raise your hand or ask me questions. I'm happy to stop and pause if a question arises. More specifically, this project is located approximately 8 miles north of the town of Ellensburg. The site is outlined there in blue. You can see Ellensburg is there in the lower right-hand corner. You see Interstate 90 running through on this map. You can see where Highway 97 runs north from I-90 just to the left of the project for orientation. Next slide, please. So the project is on approximately 4,000 acres. The land is described generally as agricultural land. It's currently used for grazing, dry land farming. The entire project area is designated as rural in the county's comprehensive plan. And the individual parcels that make up the project are zoned either agricultural 20 or forest and range. The site area is relatively flat. It does rise gradually from the south to the north, gaining approximately 400 feet in elevation from front to back. There are 6 high voltage transmission lines that run across the project, BPA and Puget Sound Energy lines. You sort of see them on the base map here. So as folks know, renewable energy and wind specifically is very site specific. This site, one of the reasons why it isn't built yet is it suffers from relatively low wind resource, not bad wind resource, but relatively low. It's not a screaming net capacity factor, but it does have very close proximity to transmission. And the project substation will be located right under the PSE 230 kV line, and we will line tap and break that 230 kV line. So it does have excellent transmission access. On the next slide is simply a demonstration of a possible turbine layout. A 100 megawatt project, the permit allows for up to 31 individual units. We showed several different figures in the 2018 FSEC permit application. This is one of the possible configurations. Just for what it's worth, each yellow dot is a turbine pad, tower, and generating unit with road and electrical collection being shown with the lines connecting the different units together. And then you'll see there's a project substation down there by what's shown as B12. On the next slide, we can also go back to any of these if you want. And the next slide is just to give context for FSEC members that are not familiar with Desert Claim, because it hasn't been heard by you all in quite a while now. These are some of the other projects that you might be familiar with that are in close proximity to the project. Immediately in front of the project, if you will, to the west is the Kittitas Valley Wind Power Project. and then a smaller Swauk Valley wind project as well. And then if you would, behind it to the east is the Wild Horse Wind facility owned and operated by PSE. And then a little further back is the Vantage wind project. So barring any questions, we can flip to the next slide. And this is when Karen gets to take it over and give you a little bit about the FSEC process. Thanks again for your time and attention to the slides. I'm happy to come back and answer any questions you might have about the project.
Okay, thanks, Rick, and thank you, council, staff, and members of the public. I just want to give a little bit of context about the FSEC process that has occurred. As many of you probably know, the Desert Claim Project has been on FSEC's roster of energy facilities for some time now. FSEC originally recommended approval of the project, and the governor executed the site certification agreement initially in 2010. At that time, the company had proposed quite a large project. It would have been more than 5,200 acres. It would have had almost 100 turbines, and it would have had a capacity of about 190 megawatts. So that was kind of the initial plan. Then in 2018, the company came back to FSEC with a redesigned project, and Rick has kind of explained some of the details of that project. It's smaller, it takes up less area, it's only a third as many turbines with a maximum of 31, and it's only about half the capacity with 100 megawatts. Now, by reducing the size of the project, that significantly reduced the environmental impacts associated with the project. And it also allowed the company to reduce the impacts on neighboring property owners by moving the turbines further away from neighboring residences. So in 2018, when the company came to FSEC with this redesigned project, FSEC did a pretty rigorous review of that project. It started with the certificate holder submitting new environmental studies on all of the sort of different potential effects of the project. FSEC staff sent a series of information requests to the applicant or to the certificate holder, which they then provided additional information about the project. Ultimately, FSEC developed a SEPA addendum associated with the redesign project. And of course, the council held hearings in the community back in the days when we actually went to the community and were able to meet in person. So it was a pretty robust project, a pretty robust process in 2018, and that resulted in Amendment 1 to the site certification agreement. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Now, for those of you who are familiar with FSEC site certification agreements for wind projects, the Desert Claim SCA looks pretty familiar. It incorporates the best practices for wind projects that have been developed over time. It also incorporates some agreements that were entered into with the Council for the Environment and other stakeholders throughout this process. So I think much of it will look familiar to you. It has a lot of kind of the similar features. For example, before the company can begin construction of the project, it has to submit literally dozens of plans to FSEC for review, detailed review and approval. During construction, there are a lot of different measures and requirements to minimize and avoid environmental impacts, and an environmental monitor is required. During operations, there are also various types of monitoring that are required, and there's a technical advisory committee, or TAC, like you have with, I believe, both the Kittitas Valley and Wild Horse projects. So a lot of these things that you see in the site certification agreement, I think, are very familiar and are similar to what you've seen in other wind project SCAs. What I want to assure you today is that the company is not requesting any changes to any of these provisions that were approved in 2018. What the company is really just requesting is an extension in the time frame to complete construction of the project. So if we can go to the next slide, I will pass it back to Rick to explain a little bit more about why you want the extension.
Great, thank you, Karen. So in the in the existing permit approval, we're supposed to have construction substantially completed by November of 2023. In anticipation of not starting construction, we sent a letter on May 5th outlining a request for a 5-year extension. And the purpose for that is, as Karen kind of alluded to, the project, we believe, has a very high likelihood of still succeeding and getting built. What we've been working on is a long-term energy contract with an off-taker, such as a utility or a large C&I commercial or industrial customer. That's typically what you see for a wind project, a 15 or 20 year like power purchase agreement, for instance. And we're still marketing the project and attempting to secure that type of an agreement, which would allow us the financial assurity to begin the construction of the project, which is a relatively high capital intensive endeavor. We think the project has a high likelihood of success. Maintaining the SCA and the FSEC approval is paramount to our ability to do that, though. And as Karen said, we feel confident that the permit approval and all the mitigation measures that were originally required can and would be complied with when we get the project off the ground. Washington State, I don't need to tell you, you're all on the forefront of it, but it is really leading the nation in the transition to a clean and decarbonized energy generation system. We believe Desert Claim project can be a part of that future. We know that Washington State specifically is looking they'll have almost double their electricity demand by the year 2050. So we know that the demand is there for a product like Desert Claim. And we think that this 100 megawatt wind product will fit nicely into that energy mix for the state. So it's our deep hope and desire that we can answer any questions you have, and we can seek this 5-year extension to the permit, allowing us a nice runway to continue to market the project, complete some of the other outstanding development items, such as finalizing and executing an interconnection agreement, which are still being worked out, for instance. So, the development process is a long one, but we are still dedicated to trying to see this one through to completion with your assistance, of course. Without being too wordy, I think that probably wraps up what I wanted to say, and happy to answer any questions anyone might have.
Council members, do you have any questions? Mr. Young.
Yeah, without revealing or disclosing any proprietary information that you need to hold close, could you briefly sketch out what kind of obstacles you're running into that are preventing you from being in a power purchase agreement right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a combination of factors. One, net capacity factor, the megawatt hours generated from a 100 megawatt project significantly impacts the megawatt hour price. And so, for instance, a site that enjoys a 40% net capacity factor versus like a relatively low 30% net capacity factor will have a significant difference in power purchase price. And this site does not enjoy what I would call a robust wind regime, but a relatively steady and middle of the road wind regime. And so it challenges the power price that the utility would pay to secure it. So at different times, it looks more or less attractive compared to alternatives such as hydroelectric power or solar PV. And we went through a period of time recently where solar photovoltaics were going down in price precipitously, and it was difficult for wind generation to compete in the Pacific Northwest with that. I think that pendulum is likely to swing back the other way, but that was one factor. So technology type and a relatively challenged wind regime made the power purchase price a little difficult. I also don't mind saying that there are always, you'll hear this a lot in renewable energy in general, but the electrical grid was really set up at a time when renewables weren't even imagined. And there are a lot of transmission constraints on the system, on the native utility system, that make it difficult to move some of this power generation around and move it to load. And this area is somewhat cut off from the load centers to the west. And so with some of the host utilities and some of the other companies, we've ran into some challenges in our ability to move the power to their load and need. Again, some of those upgrades are always happening, but I would say in summary, kind of a combination of relatively high energy price, but everything's relative, and transmission constraints have added to the challenges in getting and securing a power purchase agreement.
Thank you. I really appreciate that explanation.
Any other questions from council members? Ms. Brewster.
You mentioned the challenging wind capacity there. What capacity do you expect the desert claim to operate at?
It's a very fair question, and it's generated by the way I answered the question. Different turbine generating technologies will garner different net capacity factors. So for instance, like a smaller generating capacity machine of like 2 megawatts normally will garner a larger NCF, and a larger generating capacity machine like a 3 to 4 megawatt machine would have a lower net capacity factor in comparison. So in this example, we're looking at a low 30% net capacity factor, somewhere between, say, 30 and 33, 34%. And for comparison, for what it's worth, on the same type of scale, the center of the country, the breadbasket, if you will, Oklahoma, Texas, areas that have a lot of wind, those are seeing sites that have almost 50% net capacity factor. As a comparison tool. And in California, some of the areas in like the desert Southwest are similarly in the low 30%. And some of the robust wind areas in like the Altamont would be like 40 to 45% net capacity factor. I hope that's helpful.
So is that not unusual in Washington State, that net capacity factor?
It is not unusual. Yeah, not as bad as Arizona, where the wind does not blow at all, but the net capacity factor for wind is relatively low. And we like this site because of its setting. And we think the capacity factor is robust enough to eventually be a good economical project for ratepayers and helping to add to the decarbonization of the grid.
Did you have another question, Ms. Brewster?
No, thanks. I appreciate the comparison because I'm thinking about Kittitas Valley and Iron Horse nearby with similar capacities. So thank you.
Right. Other questions from council members? Okay, hearing none. Thank you very much for the presentation, and we'll move on to Ms. Hofgemeyer, who's going to talk about our process.
Thank you, Chair Drew. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for making the time this evening. My name is Amy Hofgemeyer, the Director of Siting and Compliance for FSEC, and I will be giving a brief presentation on the FSEC amendment review process. Next. A little bit of history about FSEC. FSEC was created in 1970 for the siting of thermal power plants. The intent was to create a one-stop permitting agency for large energy facilities. FSEC is comprised of state and local government members who review each application before voting to make a council recommendation to the governor. If recommending approval, the package to the governor includes a draft site certification agreement, or SCA, which defines all pre-construction, construction, and operation plans. If approved by the governor's office, this decision preempts other state and local regulations. Next. Multiple energy facilities fall under SX jurisdiction. Some projects are required to be cited through FSEC, such as nuclear facilities with the primary purpose of generating and selling electricity, thermal power plants greater than 350 megawatts, while others, such as wind, solar, green hydrogen storage, or clean energy manufacturing, can opt into the FSEC process. And there are a handful of other facility types that may also opt into the FSEC process as well. Next. FSEC is comprised of different state level agencies. The chairperson is appointed by the governor, and there are standing members from 5 other agencies appointed by those agencies to sit on the council. The current council is made up of Chairwoman Kathleen Drew, Eli Levitt from the Department of Ecology, Mike Livingston from the Department of Fish and Wildlife, Kate Kelly from the Department of Commerce, Lenny Young from the Department of Natural Resources, and Stacy Brewster from the Utilities and Transportation Commission. There are additional agencies that may elect to appoint a council member during the review of a new application. These agencies are the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Transportation, the Department of Health, and the Military Department. For the review of an application amendment, this is not a part of the process. The standing council oversees those requests. Next. Here's a map of the facilities that are certificated or have applied for certification under FSEC's jurisdiction. You can see marked in green, there are 6 operating facilities, including 2 natural gas facilities, 1 nuclear facility, 1 solar facility, and 2 wind facilities. If you'll recall from the previous presentation, the Kittitas Valley and Wild Horse Wind facilities are FSEC regulated facilities in the area. But the other wind projects shown on that presentation did not elect to cite through FSEC, and so they do not fall under our jurisdiction. The blue marks indicate the 4 additional facilities that are approved but not yet constructed, including the Desert Claim facility. The clear marker is the 1 facility in the process of decommissioning, and FSEC is currently reviewing applications for 5 projects marked in yellow. Next, please. Here is a flowchart showing the general process an applicant will go through when they submit an application for a new facility. The Desert Claim proposal underwent this multi-tiered review at the time of application, as described in the previous presentation. Additional State Environmental Policy Act, or SEPA, analysis was conducted at the time of the 2018 amendment request. Next, please. The review process for an amendment differs from that of a new application. When an amendment request is received, an informational meeting is required, which brings us here this evening. With an administrative amendment, such as the one requested for this project, no SEPA addendum is required. Following the informational meeting, the council will review the request before them and vote to approve or deny the amendment. For decisions that substantially change the project, the recommendation is sent to the governor for final decision. For decisions that do not substantially change the project and/or are administrative in nature, this approval or denial may be decided by the council. Next, please. That concludes my presentation for this evening. I don't actually see any members of the public on the call, but if there's anybody there who I'm not seeing on the attendance list, I would like to remind you how you can submit comments. You can indicate that you would like to speak this evening. If you're joining virtually or by phone, you may call the FSEC main line at 360-664-1345 to be added to the speaker list. And you may also send in written comments by postal mail to our office, 621 Woodland Square Loop, P.O. Box 43172, Olympia, Washington 98504-3172. Comments may also be submitted to our online comment database at https://comments.fsec.wa.gov. And that is up on the screen, and there's a link available on our website as well.
Mr. Sherman, you also have a comment to make. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Drew. I guess I have a question. This is probably directed at Ms. McGaffey. I expect that there's no reason to believe that that the action that the council may take would have any effect on the stipulation that that your client and Council of the Environment came to in 2009, correct?
Correct.
Great. That's my only question. Thank you so much.
At this point, Ms. Kelly, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. And I am only meant to raise my hand once. The question I have is, and I apologize if I might have missed it, is extension of the SCA for 5 years considered legislative, and a legislative or just an administrative action in terms of the process that Amy just described?
The process, it would be the council's decision.
Okay, that was my question.
Right, to take that into consideration, not administrative through the staff, but through the council.
But not going to the governor.
Correct, because only decisions that would make a substantial change in the SCA, only amendments that make substantial changes would go to the governor.
Okay, thank you.
And
Other
that
questions?
is spelled out in our WAC. That website is down, so I don't have the citation for you this evening. But I can provide that so I can access the information if you'd like.
I think that's just Bill Sherman, and he asked his question, I believe, unless you have another question.
I'm sorry. I didn't realize I hadn't lowered my hand. Thank you.
That's okay. So Judge Gerard, at this point, what I'll do is I'll ask if there's anyone here who wants to make a public comment, and we'll go from there. Is there anyone on this in this virtual meeting, who'd like to make a comment? Asking again, is there anyone in this meeting who would like to make a comment? One final time. Is there anyone here who would like to make a comment? Hearing none, we will see what comments may come in through our other means of getting public comments, but this public informational meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.